Are you getting struck by a second arrow? The first arrow is the thing that triggers you, something that causes difficult, painful, or just really rough and uncomfortable emotions. The second arrow is when you get upset at yourself for feeling those feelings in the first place. You can't control the first arrow. The thing that happens to you in life, it's due to external forces, right? It's a chaotic world we live in. But you can control the second arrow because it comes from yourself. Oftentimes, people look for the reason why something happened to them. Why did I get dumped? Why did I get rejected or ghosted or fired? Anything like that. And oftentimes, we turn the blame on ourselves and say, oh, it must be something due to who I am and the way that I move through the world, or the way that I, treated my partner, or the way that I dress or act or something. Because we're the easiest target. We're right there in our worlds. You're experiencing life every day. And so sometimes we turn the blame back onto ourselves, especially if there's already a wound there. If there's already something that you're insecure about or fearful about or think negatively about yourself in some way, then that can be the reason that you start assigning to many of the things that happen in your life. And it can hurt more than the first arrow. So why do we do this to ourselves? We're looking for an explanation. We find the easiest one, which is ourselves, or sometimes we're used to blaming ourselves for things. Maybe we've internalized the blame from other people in our lives. We've been blamed for things that weren't our fault, maybe in our childhood or earlier relationships. And so we start to create a narrative in our minds that comes back up every time something feels difficult or painful. So when you start feeling yourself getting upset that you're upset, notice that that's the second arrow. In fact, it can be helpful to even say that, like, oh, I see you, second arrow. Because then you identify this pattern that you have going on, and you can start to remove the experience with the second arrow altogether. So let's say you get dumped and you start blaming yourself and talking badly at yourself, or let's say you get ghosted or rejected from a date or two you've been on, and you turn and you're like, oh, I probably got ghosted because I'm not attractive enough, or oh, I'm just too much, I'm not lovable, or it must have been some goofy, ridiculous, embarrassing thing I said, like, oh, I'm such an idiot, whatever. Notice that and identify it as the second arrow and say, no, thank you. Things happen to me sometimes out of my own control. It's important to be self-reflective and analyze the way that you treat others and move through the world. But you can overdo that too much and end up just piling onto yourself in ways that aren't healthy, aren't productive, aren't teaching you anything new about yourself. Secondly, I think this is super important to notice in your relationship. If you mess up, and we all do at some point, learn the better self-talk so you can be forgiving to yourself, and therefore you'll be more likely to receive forgiveness from your partner and address the issue in a way that's more collaborative and productive, rather than just like, woe was me, or I'm awful, or sometimes we use the second arrow as a way to distance ourselves from difficult emotions, as a way to say like, oh, this is just so awful. I hate myself. I can't believe that I did that, or I must have deserved that. I'm terrible. And that doesn't allow for intelligent analysis of what happened, and it doesn't involve the other person, let's say your partner. And when you can work together to create a solution that works for both of you, then it removes the, oh, it's all me, it's all on my shoulders, right? You're not alone. The way that we use the second arrow to distance ourselves from difficult emotions is whenever you hear yourself say something like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling that way. Because society tells us in many ways that it's not okay to get too wrapped up or too in love with somebody and get hurt. It's not okay to be so sensitive. And if you start judging yourself for having those emotions in the first place, that's how to notice. Because it's okay to feel heartbroken. It's okay to feel anxious or embarrassed or upset or fragile sometimes. Like, we all can be vulnerable, and those emotions are completely healthy and normal and okay. And the minute you start judging yourself for having them, that's when you're internalizing the messaging and the judgment about having those emotions in the first place. Try to observe this happening in your partner as well, because sometimes they're not aware of it, sometimes we're not aware of it. And when you see your partner blaming themselves, having negative self-talk around something that happened to them, say, hey babe, that sounds like a second arrow. Are you loving yourself right now? Like, remember to be kind to yourself. And what can I do to help you? What can I do to support you? What could I have done differently if it involved you in some way? So this plays a big role in relationships. Once we can become aware of it, then so much will improve. If you like self-awareness and relationship tips like this, check out my podcast called Head Over Feels.